Good morning, beloved. I greet you in Jesus' wonderful name, and I pray that you're doing well today. I'd like to share a story with you today, if I may. There were once two men who created a garden. They dug out the ground and they removed the stones and they protected the garden by putting a fence around it, each man creating his own garden. In each garden, these two men planted grass and they planted numerous amounts of beautiful plants and trees and flowers. And each man attended to his garden, watering the flowers and looking after everything that he had planted. Over time, these flowers began to grow and the grass was beautiful and green. But what began to happen in both gardens is that weeds began to come up, what we call invading plants, something that both of these men never intended for. They never planted these. They only planted flowers. They only planted good trees. They only planted nice green grass. But over time, these weeds began to grow up. And there's a difference between the two men. The first man, seeing these weeds begin to grow up, began to become very obsessed with removing these invaders, getting rid of these ugly things that he never intended to be in his garden. He began to spend all of his time pulling out weeds and trying to get rid of them and throwing them over the fence and putting all his attention and energy into removing these weeds. The second man, however, noticing the weeds, kept on giving his attention to the flowers. He kept watering the flowers, he kept pruning the flowers, he kept cutting the grass, he kept taking care of the trees that he had planted and pruning them where they needed to be planted. I know it might seem strange, but the moral of the story is this: the man that spent all of his time looking at the weeds and giving attention to them, eventually the flowers that he had spent so much time on began to die. The grass began to be overgrown, and the trees that he planted that were supposed to be pretty and give shade began to be overgrown. The garden fell into decline, and the flowers died because he spent all of his time dealing with the weeds and dealing with the problems. The second man, however, his garden, the flowers became more beautiful, became bigger flowers, the trees became more beautiful, the grass became greener, and eventually those flowers that he gave attention to would overrun the weeds, and the weeds died out eventually anyway. Basic story. The moral of the story is this: what you spend your time on, what you put your attention on, is what's going to, number one, take up your time and your attention, but number two, that's what's going to grow. The Bible in the book of Galatians says, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. That which a man sows, he shall also reap." If you're sowing and spending your time on the negative things, and listen, both those men planted well and did well and cared for the garden, and both of those men had things grow up and appear that they never wanted to be there, never accounted for, and never themselves planted. Same in our lives. These things happen to us. But the question is this: 2025, what are you and I going to spend our time on? Don't get distracted with the problems of life, the difficulties, the weeds, the hindrances, I call it sandpaper, and the distractions and the problems of life. But rather, I'd like to encourage you today: water the flowers, water the grass, take care of those things. You and I choose what we spend our time on. You can spend your time on the weeds, or you can spend your time watering the flowers. I'd like to encourage you: water the flowers in your life. Sow to the good things. Don't sow to the negative things. Don't spend your time on the weeds, but spend your time on the flowers. Amen. God bless you. Have a lovely 2025. Water the flowers. Water the good things in your life. Water your good relationships. Water your marriage and your relationship with your kids. Water the time that you spend with your family. Water at your job and your responsibility. Water the flowers. Water at church. Work with the pastor. Grow the congregation. Be a member who works at the church. Water the flowers this year. Don't worry about the weeds. God bless you. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.